How mentally ill is it that you know you have a murderer on your hands and you just let him go and go to another hospital and you don't tell someone about it? I think that most of them just avoided me and they were afraid to be involved with someone that was best friends with a serial killer. I couldn't go to work. I was paralyzed with this trauma. And I went to a hypnotherapy school because I had been reading about hypnotherapy. And of course, once again, going on a spiritual quest, I was going there to figure things out about myself. People were searching themselves, so it was easy to transition into that because every person that came into my office ended up helping me heal as well as I was helping them see a way to heal.
The Big Silence, empowering personal experiences, inspiring compassion, and healing lives. We are no longer silent. We are here.
The Big Silence.
Welcome to the Big Silence podcast, Amy Loughren.
Thank you, Karena. I'm so excited to be here, and what a powerhouse you are. I'm here to talk about my story, but I'm so curious about your story that I think it may flip in the middle, and I'm just going to start asking you questions.
You can do that. I do have your gift bag downstairs, has my memoir in it, so you can, at your hotel room, indulge and hear my crazy story as we talk about your crazy story.
Yeah, the cray lives. It lives. It's so interesting that we are always saying we're not our story, and yet you and I both, we talk about our story all the time, and yet I know that it doesn't define us. I understand that it doesn't define us, and we always give this, for me, I'm always giving this advice that move on from your story and create a new story. Well, for us, part of who we are is talking about our story over and over again. And there's a lot of people that ask me, well, is it hard to talk about your story? And I say, I want to be emotional when I talk about it. And I want to still feel the feelings. I no longer feel the trauma of it, but I want to feel those emotions because I feel like one of the reasons that I suffered so much, even as a child, and after everything that happened in my story with the serial killer, was just not talking about it.
I think it's so important to talk about it because number one, it's healing for yourself. Number two, it helps others to not feel alone. And three, it saves lives. Like talking about it more, shoving stuff into a corner doesn't do anything for anyone.
Yeah.
So we were walking up to the studio and you mentioned your childhood.
Yes.
And I was like, that is one of the questions I have because I haven't read the book, but I've watched the documentary and the movie.
Yeah.
And I just like literally you see 4 pages of notes in front of me. I'm like, wow, this is so interesting. And one of my notes was, what was your childhood like?
Yeah. One of the reasons that I delved into finding reasons to why I had enough darkness in me that I attracted a serial killer. That was one of the reasons that I delved into my spiritual path. But Charles Cullen was not my first monster. My childhood was riddled with darkness, with torture, with things that I tried very hard to push down. And I was raised by 2 very young parents. My mother was only 16 and my father was 19 when they got married. So they were just trying to survive. And they put us in situations that we should not have been put in. And those situations were not good for my mental health.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to dive into that. We can, if you want to, I'm interested. Because there was something you said in the documentary to Charles, I don't not love you and I don't view you as a monster. I wasn't sure if that was you trying to get him to confess, or if that was something that you had learned behavior of just always needing to love someone. It's not that I don't love you. I do. It's not, you're not a monster. Is that something from childhood that your thinking came out, or? I don't know.
So my abuser was a part of my family, and I loved him. And it really messed up my idea about safety and security and trust, because everything that I knew that was supposed to be love and trust hurt me and gave me shame. So learning very much to figure out that this person that was the monster in my childhood wasn't just my abuser. He was also someone who taught me so many things and gave me thoughtful parts of myself that I am so grateful for. And that all mixed up in with shame just gives you a sense of darkness and a sense of just confusion in your life. And my abuse started when I was very young. I believe I was 6 or 7 when it started, and continued until I was about 11 years old. But no one believed me. I did tell my mother that I was being abused, and it was her support system. So I really needed to forgive her, because that was the only support system that she had. How could she take that away when there was no way out for her either? So taking care of my mother and taking care of her emotions and trying to understand why I was not protected was something that followed me into my adulthood. And it was one of the reasons why I felt so protective of Charles Cullen.
That would make sense. It's kind of on repeat.
Yes.
And you're thrown back into little girl Amy in this situation again. And the trauma and the pain and the hurt. Like, no, this can't be.
And shame.
There's shame. So you become a nurse because you want to help people, right?
And I wanted to protect people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going into psychology because as a teen, I wanted to figure myself out. Yeah. And that's, why people go into psychology is really to figure out their families, figure out themselves. Well, not everyone, but I think that everyone has a little bit of that when they go into psychology and psychiatry. And I ran out of college money, so I started working at a nursing home. And while I was working at that nursing home as a nurse's aide, I saw an LPN, a licensed practical nurse, abuse a resident. And I went to my supervisor, and once again, here we are on repeat. She did not believe me. And she said that we had a personality conflict.
How does that make you feel? Like, this keeps happening. People don't listen to you. They don't believe you. How does that feel internally for you?
I think when I was a child, I didn't have any control over it. With that situation, I had some control. I wasn't going to allow that to happen. So I went to nursing school so that I could become a registered nurse. And it was to protect those residents. And because I wanted to fire her, I wanted to be in a position of, I don't like the word power, but I wanted to be in a position where I could protect.
Yeah.
So I think that then there was anger. And I think it was also very confusing because that anger was my driving force. And protecting and anger became a theme in my life.
So going back to your childhood and your abuser, was there ever any resolve? Either not necessarily with them, but maybe within yourself?
I think that my story was always that victim part of it until I really started on my spiritual path.
Right.
I think that I was always in my mind, well, these things are happening, or my behavior is this because I was abused.
Yeah.
And I think I carried that until my spiritual path. And then I realized I was never a victim. I was put in these situations. And I look at this from a spiritual standpoint for my own journey, that to me, there was nothing to forgive. He played a role in my life. He was important in my life. And the things that happened to me became a way for me to develop. And the only reason that Charles Cullen is behind bars is because I was able to pull that darkness to me, and I was able to see him for who he was. So it was a gift in the long run because I ended up being able to save a lot of people.
Because I understand what you're saying, because I always say what happened in my childhood is that gift that I have. And if you hadn't gone through what you went through, Charles could have hurt many more people if you didn't have that bravery to do what you did, which we'll get into. So you were like raised with that superpower to be like, I can handle this and like process it. So let's dive into that. You are an ICU nurse on the night shift. First of all, let's talk night shift. Is that a difficult shift?
Oh, Jesus.
My mom was a case or social worker on a night shift at a hospital for many years, and it really affected her mental health. But then I can't imagine ICU night shift.
ICU and night shift, one of the reasons that I didn't understand that I was actually very sick when I was working night shift, I ended up being diagnosed with electrical cardiomyopathy. I was so sick all the time just from being so fucking exhausted.
Yeah.
I was so tired all the time, and I had jet lag for decades.
Yeah.
And all of the cortisol in your system from not having the right amount of sleep, for not having the right nutrition, and pushing yourself to the point of absolute exhaustion. My brain was squished.
Well, and you don't get the sunlight you need.
Yes.
The socialization.
Yes.
Your socialization, I would imagine, is in that ICU.
My coworkers.
You're the three.
Yes.
Yeah. The Three Musketeers.
The Three Musketeers.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how long did you work at the hospital in New Jersey before Charles came in?
I don't remember. Charles Graber, he's amazing. He's the investigative reporter that wrote the book, The Good Nurse.
Yeah.
I actually have to call him and say, when did this happen to me? Because he has it down. He has the chronology of everything down. I have no clue how long. He can tell you the date that I started working there and the date that Charlie started working there. I want to say it was weeks, but Charles Graber is probably going to disagree with that.
Well, you block out traumatic events too, and So you're working, you make a great friend. Like, what is this experience like for you? I'm trying to think, like, because of your childhood, but also because you're an ICU night nurse, and the Three Musketeers are your friends. So you're bonding and you're trauma bonding. At the ICU. Like, that's intense. Like, explain even what an ICU nurse has to do.
It is pretty insane what we have to do. Normal people, like, I don't think that there is much understanding behind the technicalities that we go through and the training that we go through. There's no doctors. We did have at one point we did end up having a hospitalist that was actually in the ICU for night shift. But when I started working there was no hospitalist that was just for the ICU. So the decisions that you are making completely autonomously.
Right.
So you have to know your shit. So it is getting to work, getting report, finding out that your patient is crashing, and crashing meaning that their heart rate is low or their blood pressure is high or they need something immediate that you have to do. And they've got 12 different drips that you have to coordinate so that they're not walking over, so that they're taking care of your patient rather than combining something that could be deadly.
Right.
And they're also on ventilators. So you have to make sure that the ventilator is working well. You have to make sure that you're turning them every 2 hours. You have to make sure that you are washing them, caring for them, and then taking care of the families. And it's an intense place to work. It's very intense.
Would you say night nurse is more intense than day? Because it's like all on you.
I think that it's all different because day nurses have to go through getting their patients down for their CAT scans and getting them ready for their procedures. And it's a totally different animal. It's different.
Yeah. All right. So you're there. You make friends with your nurses. How are you feeling? And in your heart condition, and you were keeping it quiet. So that's extra stress.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to keep it quiet because I was a travel nurse. Okay. And if the travel company knew that I physically could not do my job, I would not only lose that contract, but I would lose my health insurance. And back then, if you had a pre-existing condition,
right,
I would not be able to get health insurance. And I needed health care and I needed an operation.
Right. And you had 2 kids?
2 kids, Yay. My daughters.
Which now you live in Florida, close by.
Yes, my beautiful, wonderful, my God, they're just wonderful human beings, my 2 daughters, wonderful human beings.
So you're working, you got the stress of your job, of your health, but Charles is your friend.
Yes, and he was funny. He kept me entertained. And we talked about everything from our relationships to things in nursing that I used him as a resource because he was brilliant. But mostly, he was always there for me. If I was physically incapable of taking care of my patients, I would try to just push myself through. But Charlie was always there to support me in case I was really having a rough time.
Your abuser, when you were a child, were they abusing, but also there for you? Also
there for me, and someone that I relied on emotionally.
Yeah. Mm. But isn't that interesting? Like it's just 3 nurses. And how did he end up there? How did he end up working with you? Like, what do you think that pull was?
Well, just the idea. I mean, if we're talking from a spiritual standpoint, he lived in Pennsylvania. I lived in upstate New York. Mm-hmm. We then met each other in New Jersey. The odds of us ever meeting, I lived 3.5 hours from that hospital. We would never have met. It was like a 1 in a billion chance that we would have ever started working together. And then being on the same shift and then me befriending him.
So then let's go into the spiritual standpoint, which, is where your shift is now. And like, was he almost led to you to save the lives? And like going into that and how that all came about. But I almost believe he was led to you.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
And when it came right down to it, he wanted to be caught. He wanted someone to stop him. He really did. And when I did see the evidence, he wasn't hiding it.
Like he was making it, he started getting messy.
He wasn't messy.
No.
What he was not hiding it.
Right. Because you walked in on him one time doing what he was doing. Yeah. And that was the first time that you realized it. Because you were in denial with the detective. Right.
So I did not know that Charlie was harming patients until after he was fired. Okay. So the movie The Good Nurse makes it seem like I was still working with him when I realized it. I understand why they made that decision just for dramatic purposes. I get it. But I did not know until after he was fired.
And you didn't have in your own mind like any suspect? Like why are more people?
No, and the situation where I walked in on him, I was the code team leader that day and that night, and he was already in the room when the patient was coding, and he was injecting a medication. And of course, I go in, I start documenting, I ask him what he has given to the patient, and he said lidocaine. And I remember tipping my head a little bit because lidocaine wasn't a wrong medication, but for ACLS standards, for critical care standards, that was an older medication that we didn't really use anymore. But I thought, he's so brilliant. Of course, there must be a reason why he chose lidocaine. And we had to continue with the lidocaine because that was the first line drug. And we could not go back to using a different drug, which would have been amiodarone. And he was a proponent of using amiodarone. So it was a really strange thing that he used lidocaine. And we're going through this code. The intern shows up and he says, okay, what's going on in this code? And I told him what was given to the patient. And he said, who the fuck gave this patient lidocaine? I was the team leader, so I had to take responsibility for this. And I said, well, I did. It's an ACLS medication. We can give this medication. It's a cardiac medication. It's not a wrong medication. And he said, she's allergic to lidocaine. Allergic. So after that happened, Charlie came to me and wanted to protect me and told me to never, ever take responsibility for his decisions. And he was so serious. I've never seen him like that. He was really afraid for me, really genuinely afraid for me.
So then you had even more trust in him.
I did have more trust in him because now he's trying to protect me.
So when does the actual confusion set in? Because he's protecting you, and with detectives that are starting to investigate, you're protecting him. Like, what was that feeling for you when you realized that someone you trust and you love could possibly not be who you thought they were? When
I was shown the evidence, and I saw beyond a shadow of a doubt, I saw on the evidence he was pulling out medications that there was no possible way that he could have been using those for anything but sinister reasons. It was like my entire world just started to, I really thought that I was going to pass out because it was so clear to me. And I had to, in that moment, change everything that I thought about him. Plus, I was scared. I was scared out of my mind that here I was literally working with someone who was murdering people. At that time, I thought that it was only maybe one person because we were looking at one particular person. But what that does to your brain to try and understand that someone not only is not who they say that they are, but they are so twisted and that they're so mentally ill. There's no way to describe what happened in my brain. I don't remember driving home after I saw the evidence. I just blanked. I completely blanked out.
Wow. Yeah. That's some pretty heavy stuff. And that's when you thought it was one person.
Yeah. I really thought that it was one person. And also in my mind, I wanted to believe that he was mercifully killing. I wanted so badly to believe that.
And so when did you realize that he was not a mercy killer, but cold-blooded killer?
I stayed in denial for a long time.
Yeah.
A really long time. I
can see that.
I stayed in denial until, and this is very challenging to even say this, but it was when I read Charles Graeber's book, because there were so many things that I did not know. I did not know his history of animal abuse. I did not know his history of trying to murder someone when he was only 9 years old. I did not know his history of alcoholism or his history of, I'm making up the number, I think it was 13 attempted suicide attempts.
Oh, wow.
I did not understand how mentally ill he really was. And I did not work on the part of the investigation where they would have shown me that type of evidence, that he was literally sometimes waking them up to tell them that he was going to murder them. He used medications that were meant to woke torture.
Up the patients?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah. He used medications that were meant to torture. And after reading the book, I just couldn't, there was no going back after that. And there was no denying it after that. And then I felt such shame for still loving him.
But again, that's how you were raised.
Yeah.
So it's heavy already. Childhood, and then now this. Granted, you already are in nighttime shift at ICU. You find this out about Charlie, and then the detectives ask you to get evidence against him and wear a wire. And how what did that feel like? So the book hadn't come out yet, obviously. So you still loved him and believed he was a mercy killer and not a monster, but you had to get him to confess. So that must have been very, in your mind, very torturous and pulled you in so many directions.
It was just sad also that I had to record our conversations over the phone, and I knew that he was listening to me and I was caring about him, and here he was answering the phone knowing that this was a person who cared about him. And I was in a warehouse somewhere with a phone with 6 other people listening in, and I was betraying everything that being a friend was about. And here he was, this mentally ill person who felt loved, who felt cared for. I was calling him.
Do you think he actually felt loved, or was he capable of that? Or
I don't know.
Yeah.
I do know that his decisions to protect me, if anything, he had a hero complex, maybe.
Yeah.
But
Because he's never been diagnosed with anything because he won't talk to psychiatrists.
He has not.
Yeah.
He has not. So I knew when I was recording those conversations that I was hurting him. I knew it, and it felt awful.
So you carried the guilt. At that point, did you know there were more than one victim?
I think that after, yes,
Yeah.
I was reading through the evidence that they were sharing with me, and I was reading through the medical records. And by then, I did understand that it was multiple patients, but I was not in on all of the things that the detectives were doing behind the scenes. They, I really thought that I was this huge part of this investigation. I needed to get this confession out of him, but they were doing so much work.
Yeah.
And of course they didn't share with me. They had already exhumed a body. They had a lot of evidence, but to me it was so weighty because what I believed is that he was going to go free, which he may have if I hadn't gotten a confession out of him.
Right, because he would move from hospital to hospital. And I don't know if we can talk about private hospitals and the financial benefit and not wanting a lawsuit against them and, maybe some things being hidden. And so he would perhaps get fired from where you were working and move on to somewhere else.
Well, what Charles Graeber outlines in the book is that at least 5 hospitals knew that he was murdering someone.
Holy shit.
At least 5 hospitals. So to me, yes, Charlie is mentally ill.
Yeah.
We know this. Not that my goodness, we all struggle with mental illness, but his was to the extreme. Not that we all struggle, but...
Well, I wouldn't say not everyone has a mental illness, but there's disorders, there's just different things. We all go through a lot. Yes. Everyone's got something, but not everyone is a serial killer.
That's right.
So that's definitely...
Yes. But the people, let's really comprehend the people who were covering this up. What was wrong with them? What was wrong with them? I think that where I have had a hard time in forgiving and letting something go is that these people did not care, did not give a shit about those patients, did not care about the patients at all. They cared about their bottom line.
The money. Yeah.
It was all about money. And how mentally ill is it that you have a murderer on your hands and you just let him go and go to another hospital and you don't tell someone about it? Like, what?
And there's evidence of that now. So has anything happened to those other hospitals?
Actually, what I do know is that there were lawsuits. There were civil lawsuits that went through, but I don't have any knowledge of like how much these families were paid out. But there's also a cap on how much can be paid out. The person who covered it up in my hospital in Somerset Medical Center, she was promoted. She was promoted for covering it up. Promoted.
Damn.
Yes.
This is so messed up.
Yes.
Okay.
I know.
This is just crazy. It
is.
You go to the hospital to be taken care of and put your life in the hands of the doctors and the nurses. That's a whole conversation I could have. I know when I was my mom's caretaker, it's like so many arguments with doctors. They're like, no, we don't do that. We don't know. Nope. Like it's a very frustrating system that we need.
Yes. It's so flawed. It's so broken. It's so broken.
Yeah. Yeah. So Charlie gets busted.
Yes.
On the wire, he says something and he gets arrested. And
Actually, when I was wearing
Mm-hmm.
the wire malfunctioned, and I did get a confession out of him, at least enough to arrest him, but it malfunctioned. So they, yeah, yeah.
So there was nothing.
So essentially, it would have been me going through a trial, my word.
Yeah.
It would have been my word. But they asked me to go back in again after I had already essentially gotten this confession from him. And I went back in. They had held him for 3 days and he wouldn't speak. I think it was 2 days. They were going to they had to release him within 3 days. And I went back in again to try and get the actual smoking gun out of him, and I did.
Yeah, and you said that he wanted to be caught at one eventually. Why do you say that?
He spent, I believe, 9 hours after he did confess to me. He spent 9 hours talking about everything, just releasing, finally being able to release all of this. The other thing is, when you looked at all of the Pyxis printouts, the medication dispensing system, when you read through it, there were things, for instance, there was a medication where you only need a tiny little vial to go into a 250cc bag that lasts about 24 hours. And I might take out one of those vials, say, every 2 weeks for that particular drip, to reconstitute that particular drip. And in one night, without trying to hide it, he took out 12 of those vials on one patient. 12.
Oh my God.
Didn't hide it, wasn't trying to hide it. There were things that he hid, of course.
Yeah.
And if you didn't know the Pyxis system, you wouldn't know what he was doing. But there were multiple things that I saw that it was very obvious he wanted to be caught.
So were you the one that went into the Pyxis system to like find it? No one else was looking, or detectives did?
So the detectives had the printouts. They shared those printouts with me.
Mm-hmm.
What they didn't have when we first started talking, when I first started helping them, they did not have all of the records, the medical records. The hospital had not shared the medical records with them.
So hiding them? Because I mean, that's
Hiding
a
them.
lot of medication to be missing. I assume someone takes inventory.
They were hiding. Yes. They were hiding the evidence. Yes, they were.
So you've been very vocal about everything. Has anyone tried to come after you for a lawsuit for being vocal about the truth?
There are a couple of things that have stopped them. One of them is, do they really want to go into this? Would they really want to go after me?
Yeah.
When it was very obvious that they were covering things up.
Yeah.
The other thing is Somerset Medical Center no longer exists.
Oh.
It was bought out. So I did not really start talking about any of this until the book came out in 2013.
Okay.
So everything was already outlined in the book.
Yeah.
Before that, I didn't talk about anything. No one knew my story. No one knew who I was. No one knew about it.
Yeah. Okay. So you're in the clear. Just making sure. I hope.
Oh, yeah. There were a lot of conversations that we had with attorneys, but Charles Graber did his homework.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people have come after him for what was written in the book.
But I mean, if you're just speaking the truth and
well, who knows? I just know that they haven't yet.
Yeah.
There's still time.
Okay. So Charlie's convicted. You didn't have to go to trial for it.
So no one knew who I was. In all of the paperwork, I was CI.
Okay.
So I was the confidential informant. So no one knew that I worked on it, including Charlie.
Okay. Oh, this is stressful. God, I need to breathe. Okay, so Charlie goes to trial. He's, what is he? He has like 18 life sentences or something,
Something like that.
and not the death penalty because or
So
he,
there were a few things that changed. I know originally he wanted the death penalty, but his family, I believe, and I don't know this for certain, but I believe his family talked him out of it because, well, because. And but he initially had that on the table that he wanted the death penalty. He would start this confession process only if he could have the death penalty.
And so we were talking walking up here because in the documentary it was 36 patients that he confessed to, right? Or
I believe it was 40,
40.
that he actually said, but there was a challenge with that.
Yep.
He wanted and should have only confessed to those that he knew for certain what he injected into them, and the way that they died was the direct result from what he had done to them. However, attempted murders, or the murders that at least professionals who have looked at this and really counted up how many people he actually murdered, it's well over 400 and perhaps even as high as 1,000 people that he murdered. Just at Somerset Medical Center, the attempted murders were in the hundreds.
Okay, let's talk about you. He's gone. Do you ever face him again and have a conversation with him?
So I did go and see him in prison, and it was a very emotional moment when we saw each other. And it was that, just like you see in the movies with the glass and the telephone that you pick up to talk to them. But he was shackled, and the two guards that were unshackling him the entire time, he kept his eyes right on me. And I just, of course, just crying, just because it was so weighty to see him again. And he put his hand up against the glass, and I put my hand up with him, and he said, "I'm sorry."
Did you feel that was sincere?
No, he wasn't sorry.
Yeah.
He wasn't. I think he was sorry that I was crying. I think that the hero in him wanted me to still believe that he was a mercy killer, and that hero in him had to say something to stay within that role.
Oh. So moving forward, like, how do you even move forward from that? Because I mean, I was even reading like some of the bags that you would take, he had already put stuff in and you didn't even know you were taking it to patients.
Yes.
And like, that's gotta be heavy.
I asked him if I had harmed someone.
Yeah.
I didn't get the answers that I wanted. I just wanted to hear him say that I didn't. But of course, I was one of those nurses. I'm sure that the medications, those IV drip bags that I was hanging, I'm sure they were poisoned. I'm sure of it.
Oh. That's gotta weigh a lot. So here,
a lot of guilt.
Yeah. What with PTSD and going through all of this, like, how do you even begin, and how long did it take you to even begin to heal? Although we know healing takes a lifetime.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I would say that during that time, I did not understand how badly I had been affected. No one asked me if I was okay. There was
Really?
no one at the hospital that asked me if I was okay. The last thing that anyone wanted to do was talk about it. And I think that there was this original just curiosity from the other nurses. But when it came down to it, I had to keep working at Somerset Medical Center because I needed my insurance. And I think that most of them just avoided me, and they were afraid to be involved with someone that was best friends with a serial killer.
So now you have this stigma of best friends of a serial killer.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you begin to heal yourself, help escape that stigma now, and go to work every day or whatever shifts that you have? How do you start moving forward?
I really had a couple of years where I just completely ignored it and did a lot of soul searching in the sense that I understood that there was some kind of darkness in me that brought him to me. And then I just had a meltdown one day and I just couldn't work. I couldn't be in the nursing profession. I just couldn't, I couldn't go to work. I was paralyzed with this trauma. And I went to a hypnotherapy school because I had been reading about hypnotherapy. And of course, once again, going on a spiritual quest, I was going there to figure things out about myself, thinking that, okay, maybe this is a way out of nursing. Also, that maybe I could become a hypnotherapist to help other people. I ended up with that being my gateway modality, and it started to open up all kinds of different modalities. And I started discovering Reiki. I started discovering reconnective healing, hundreds of different modalities that were non-traditional, that people are out there being really using these on their healing path. And I just went from modality to modality and went to every possible workshop that I could and got every possible certification that I could, became a Reiki master, became a reconnective healer, and became a clinical hypnotherapist. I had a pretty great practice in Oneonta, New York, and people were searching themselves. So it was easy to transition into that because every person that came into my office ended up helping me heal as well, as I was helping them see a way to heal.
Right. And so now you do private nursing, right?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Do you mix in what you've learned? Because I think that would be like the best thing, is mixing in the Reiki, the sound healing, the chakra healing with your patients that you take care of, and making them feel, just feel at ease and healing in a different way than just medicine.
I think that there's no separation anymore from, I don't think that nursing is a separate modality. I think that all of these modalities work together. And I think that's where my quest is now, is to meld all of these together, meld together the healthcare profession with these non-traditional therapies, because they complement one another. And I do think that we know that. I think that most people are understanding this already, and they're searching for this. They're seeking. They're already. And if I start talking about it with other nurses, they are just as excited to learn about it as I was. So I think that it's becoming very mainstream.
Yeah. And this incident in New Jersey at Somerset Medical Center was 20 years ago?
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, more than 20. It's 21 years now.
Wow. And the healing continues in the families that are still going through the pain of what happened. And like, where do you like genuinely feel you're at? But because I can see you still get emotional from this pain, and which is understandable, but do you feel like you're in a good place now?
I feel like I'm in the best place that I've ever been.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things that I was still really struggling with, and that was my sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still having panic attacks with my sleep. I would wake up with this intense sense of dread, and everything that I would use, meditations in the morning, meditations at night, meditations during the day. I was using yoga. I was using everything that you can think of to help insomnia, but the insomnia was connected to panic attacks. And as much as I would say I was doing great, I'm really dealing with everything really well, I could not get past it. So just recently, I would say within this year, it was I finally talked to my doctor about it and said, I am not sleeping well. Like plus working night shift for so many years, it messes up your circadian rhythm so badly.
Yeah.
And she said, well, have you ever seen a psychiatrist? I mean, certainly I've done talk therapy and all of those things are wonderful. And I said, I haven't seen a psychiatrist, which I thought was really interesting, that I had never actually gone to a psychiatrist, someone who could possibly medicate me. And I kept the stigma. We talk about these stigmas, and I still held on to a stigma of being medicated. So I went to see a psychiatrist for the first time, and I have normal sleep now. I don't have panic attacks waking up every day.
Wow.
And I sleep like a baby.
Oh my God.
And I spent all of these years just because of that stigmatization of being medicated.
Yeah.
I suffered through that type of anxiety instead of being medicated. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for my psychiatrist.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of years to suffer like that.
Yeah.
And you're doing all of the modalities, and I'm for all of that. But like, do what you need to do.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So I want to talk about nurses in general. So we met at Operation Happy Nurse and Lemonade Gala, where we were both honored for our work in mental health. And talking more about nurses and any tips I have a ton of nurse friends, and especially in ICU, and then COVID happened and so much PTSD. Any advice, tips for them to avoid burnout, anxiety, depression, all of the PTSD that's going on?
One thing I don't say is self-care because I think it's so overused.
Yeah.
It's just so overused. It's so obvious that we can't say self-care.
Yeah. Okay.
Meditation. And I teach meditation. I'm a mentor for meditation and for having an actual practice, because you don't have to sit in lotus pose to be able to meditate. And there's just so many different ways to meditate. I use Jack Kornfield as a meditation mentor myself, and using his practices helped me with my practice, and I then in turn help people with theirs. And you can have a practice that is only for a minute and a half a day that can make an actual difference. It's find someone, and I would say take actual meditation classes, because we can use all of the apps. We can look on YouTube. All of those things are wonderful. Guided meditations, they're wonderful. But I think that there is a difference when you work with someone that is actually there to help you understand your own practice and how to have a practice.
I agree.
Meditation is a lot easier than people think. And I have known so many that are against meditation because they can't slow their mind down.
That's the point of it.
Yeah. And that's why it's called a practice.
Yeah.
Is because you need to practice so that it works in times when you need it the most. And that's not when things are easy, but practicing when things are easy.
I always say it's like meditation is kind of, you get a practice of working out. You build a practice and your muscles get stronger.
Yes.
And just like that, your meditation practice will get stronger.
Yes.
You just don't give up.
Yeah, definitely. But find your groove.
Yeah.
There's not one specific way to meditate. Find your groove.
And I do want to point out that you have a new webinar on nurse.com in November. I'll put the link in the show notes too.
That's exciting. Yes.
And what can you get at the webinar?
So the webinar is, I am building this with nurse.com, and not only is there going to be amazing giveaways, including $1,000 gift certificate, and there's going to be an Epic Nurses Day giveaway, which I'm so excited about, but it's a free ticket. You don't have to pay, and you will walk away with a practice. It's really about learning how to fill your cup, just what we were talking about. And I will teach 5 different meditation practices, which it will probably end up being quite a few more. Yeah. But it will be 5 different meditation practices that you can take away and actually start your daily meditation practice, and things that work. Yeah. It's not going to be me saying go home with an app. It's going to be me actually teaching you how to do this.
I love that. And you probably don't have to be a nurse to join.
You don't, although it's set up for healthcare workers.
Okay.
And so nurse.com is really focused on nurses.
Yeah. Okay. I have 2 personal questions that are just coming in my head. First, are you overprotective of yourself and making new friends? Since Charlie, do you have your guard up, or have you worked through that?
I have less of a guard up. Because through my spiritual quest, what I understand is that it was that friendship that put him behind bars. So if I hadn't befriended him, then that never would have happened.
But can you see the red flags now?
I don't need to.
You don't need to. Okay.
I don't need to.
Yeah.
I feel like my darkness is understood a lot more now. And I think that the darkness in people, there's all different levels of darkness. And I don't think that there's one of us that is all light. And I think that that darkness is a place to bond. And it's a way for us to help heal each other. I think I trust more. I trust people more.
That's so interesting too, because I'm a very trusting person too.
Yeah.
And then I'll pull in some of those people and I observe. I'm like, okay, I understand what this relationship is meant to be and why they're here.
Yes. Yeah. Very good point. Like, you can pull people in and realize they're only here for a season. They're only here for
a reason.
Yes. It doesn't have to be, this is going to end up being a lifelong friend. This is a connection. And I think that I am much more open to connecting, and I love connecting.
Yeah. Then I guess that would void my second question, because I was going to ask if you have a rule or personal pact to not grow fond of certain patients, because I know with Charlie, like sometimes I thought I saw or read that you felt like he sometimes took action on patients that you were fond with. But is there any, like with nurses, it's got to be such a tough job. Like, do you guys try not to grow fond of patients, or it just happens naturally?
I think that you have to.
Yeah.
You have to connect with them.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons that healthcare is the way that it is now is because it became capitalism. And we lost that connection with them. We've lost the connection with our patients. And I shouldn't say nurses have lost the connection. Institutions have lost that connection, and they frown upon making those connections. But I see nurses all of the time loving and crying when the families cry, and being so much a part of their patients' lives. And I think that that's the only way to be a nurse. I think it's the only way.
I agree. And I've been around some beautiful souls and nurses with my mom and people who work in hospice. And I'm like, how do you do this every day? They're like, because we care.
Love. Yeah. Love is not finite. I always say love is not pie. There's not just a slice here and a slice there. Love is the ocean. It's just the ocean.
Thank you, Amy. That is a beautiful quote to end this extraordinary podcast on. Where can we find you? We'll put it in the show notes, but you can say it here too.
amythegoodnurse.com, and you can also look up mostimportantpatient.com.
And we'll put the show, it's The Good Nurse is the movie, and then the documentary was that I just watched,
Capturing the Killer Nurse.
Go watch it. And you're about to film another documentary.
I'm leaving for London in, I think, less than 2 weeks. When is it? The 26th I leave.
Yep.
And I'll be in London filming.
All right. Keep at it. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Karena.
The big silence. The big silence.